They say an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Welcome to Walking Through the Word for today. We're in John chapter 15, and Jesus is having a conversation about the vine and the branches, and he talks about bearing fruit. Now, here's the thing about fruit. We have different misconceptions and ideas of what fruit is. You know, sometimes we'll look at this and go, oh, well, he's talking about the fruits of the Spirit. No, he's not talking about the fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit are something that the Holy Spirit does to us. What he's talking about here is the fruit of our lives. In other words, what are we investing in our lives, and what is it that we're spending all of our time doing? Not all fruit is created equal. For example, the healthiest fruit that you can eat with the most value and nutrients would be things like kiwis or pineapples. And interestingly enough, apples actually aren't the healthiest. They're one of the least healthiest, though they are still healthy. This is the same thing in our lives. We can invest in things that are healthy on the surface, but don't necessarily have the value that they really should. So where is value measured? How do you measure value? Well, what Jesus is talking about here in 15 verses 5 through 8 is, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. What fruit are we talking about? We're talking about the fruit that God desires for us to bear, not our fruit. See, our fruit has less value to it, and when we often look at fruit, we think of things like, what do we invest our lives in? And we invest it in, well, a lot of us will argue things like family and those kind of things. The truth is that our bank account actually reflects what we really spend fruit on, and a lot of times it's on pretty useless things: entertainment, food, going out to eat, all those kind of different things. And so we're not really bearing fruit of value. While we need food, while we certainly need family and relationships, the question is the fruit that we're supposed to be bearing, does it have eternal significance? And this is what Jesus is talking about. If you don't remain in me, in verse 6, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. You see, when we focus on the wrong fruits, our nourishment, who is Jesus, our spiritual nourishment, which in turn feeds our physical nourishment, our mental nourishment, all of our nourishment, if we're focusing on God, comes in the right ways and in the right methods. If we're focusing on the wrong things, then our conduit to God becomes withered, it becomes less, it becomes something that suddenly no longer has enough strength and value. It would be like literally eating McDonald's, the Super Size Me show, every single day. And there are some healthy things on McDonald's menu, but if you literally just ordered nothing but French fries and ate nothing but French fries, I think everybody would agree that that's not the healthiest lifestyle to go about. It's the same thing with us. If we continue to nourish ourselves in the wrong things, our fruit becomes, well, it becomes less valuable. It becomes less withered. And Jesus says, but if you remain in me, verse 7, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done. But you're like, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about that one tomorrow. But ultimately what we're talking about here is that we want in verse 8 to be my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. In other words, the fruit that we should be focusing on is the fruit of a disciple of Christ. That our lives should manifest healthy fruit that shows a healthy relationship with God. Our fruit is going to only be so big and so large as it's only going to get that way if we're remaining in God. If we're not remaining in the right frame of mind when it comes to God and finding nourishment in the ways that we're supposed to, then we miss out and we end up with less valuable fruit. Jesus wants us to remain within him, remain in him as our source of nourishment, so we can be focused on the right kind of fruit. This does require a little bit of a brain shift for us, because that means that we now have to set aside our own personal desires and what we think is good for us, and instead focus on what Jesus tells us is good for us, and that is remaining in him. Okay, so we'll talk about that whole whatever you wish and it will be done for you thing here in a minute, because believe it or not, it has quite a bit to do with where you get your nourishment.